stand this morning and give honor to our King, our Lord Jesus Christ. We lift you up in the day, God. We thank you for this opportunity once again, Lord God, to purge us, to change us. Wherewithal we'll show a young man cleanse his heart. We offer up praise. We offer up glory and honor to you, Lord King. Lord King of Kings, Lord of Lords, we praise you this morning. Help us to stir up this gift that's within us, Lord God. Help us to trust in you with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our might, Lord God. Oh, let us shake off those heavy bands and lift up those holy hands, Lord God. Oh, teach us your word. Teach us your spirit, Lord God. Let us understand your ways, Lord Jesus. Glory be to God. Glory be to God. Hallelujah, Lord God. We thank you for breath this morning, Lord God. We thank you for a roof over our head and food on the table and clothes on our back, Lord God. We thank you for all the needs that you provide, Lord God, and all the wants, Lord Jesus. Hallelujah. So praise be to you, the most high King of Kings and the most Lord of Lords. Glory be to God. Glory be to God. Thank you, Lord God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, Lord Jesus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Amen. Amen. You may be seated this morning. Hallelujah. You know, sometimes we take a little bit longer, but, you know, we have to get those cobwebs out. And sometimes there's more of them than not. Okay? And that's why praise is such a vital key to our success in spiritual matters. And Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, which means praise. So when we praise God, we're actually cleansing ourselves from the things that are opposite of what is truly in the eyes of God. And so it takes a little time to do that. And so, again, when we enter his house, enter his sanctuary, we're fighting enemies. We're always fighting the fight. And some days are more difficult than others. But some days you feel like you have everything under control. And that's when we're close to him. I believe when we're close to him, when we're prayed up, when we're praised up, and everything's going well, we feel like, wow, I can get a revelation today. But I believe that it doesn't matter where you're at this morning. If you're hurting, if you're doing well, either way you can get a revelation. You can get an understanding of God, because God's here for all of us. All of us. He said he came to heal those that were sick. He came to help those that were lost, you know, and that's what he does, and he does it best. And that's what my prayer is. Even before I come up to this pulpit, I say, God, let the words I speak be from you. Let it be what your people need, and including myself, and put the words in my mouth. Help me to speak the words that you want. And again, it's being humble, but it's being what God wants. I want to do what God wants, and sometimes I don't do what God wants, and I want to make it where it's always what God wants. And it takes time, it takes effort, it takes commitment, and that's what we do. We fight, we press on. And so if we surround ourselves with people that have the same motives, it'll become easier. It'll become something that we desire to do. It'll be something that we plan to do. And as we grow, we face numerous battles, because he said many are the afflictions of the righteous. So I'm saying when we grow spiritually, there's going to be spiritual wars, sometimes spiritual battles that seem like, why is this here? This doesn't make any sense. Why does this happen? Why does this happen? Chapter 38, so forgive me for that. But it was the mercy of God in Hezekiah. We'll go over the first couple of verses once again, but we'll continue with 7 and 8. I think that's where I left off. Actually, 9 through 14, so there you go. But he talked about the mercy of God. He said in those days, and again, we remember that. And I keep repeating this because we need to understand what's going on. We need to understand where we are at in our lives, and we can compare the two. We can compare and contrast. Remember, it was always a war. It seemed like they were always at war in the Old Testament. But physically, they were at war. But mentally, spiritually, we're at war every day. And that's what this is for. Remember, it's for our example that we read these stories with the Spirit of God in us to help us develop the ability to withstand these these forces that come against us. Remember, the forces that come against us are 90% in our mind, if not 100%. And so we have to fight with weapons that deal with our imaginations, our thought process, our spiritual process. And if we don't, then we're fighting a battle with obsolete weapons. We can't win. We can't win. So, again, this is Hezekiah. He was a good king, and yeah, he made a couple of mistakes, but still, he was still a good king, and he desired the things of God, and he tried to do what was right in the eyes of God, and yeah, he fell a couple of times. He tried to make an alliance with another country just in case, and sometimes we do that ourselves. We try to make an alliance with someone else just in case. But there is no alternative plan. God is the plan, and the backup plan is God, and the second backup plan is God. And as long as we know that, then we can put more faith and more trust in God. And that's what happens even with taking. I believe we get to the point, as we go through these afflictions, we get to the place where God says, I want what's dearest in your heart, and I want you to put it on the altar, just like Abraham did with his son. He said, I want to know, and it's not until you do it that I know, just like he did with Abraham. It was accounted unto Abraham for righteousness when he went through the act, not him saying it. And many times we say we love God, but God's saying, just continue to show me. Show me in your life. Show me in your walk. Show me in the things that you do. Show me in the way you respond to me. And that's what we continue to do. And as we grow, he builds. God's not going to bring us from second grade to eighth grade. He's going to let us go through the steps so that we will have a structured ability to withstand the enemy. He doesn't want us to fall. He doesn't want us to lose. He doesn't want us to quit. But sometimes the ability to understand the things in life that are worthwhile, we have to realize that it's going to take everything that we have. It's not going to be something that comes easy, so we have to work at it. So the best way that happens is when you have structure. Because when you fall, you don't want to fall down 2 stories when you can only when there's a chance you can only fall 1. So it's an understanding that says, okay, I may fall, but I'm going to get back up. I'm an overcomer. Called, chosen, and faithful. We're overcomers. So whatever we're going through right now, and we feel like we may be failing, God's saying, listen, there's a way that you're not going to fail through this, but you have to do it my way. And that's what God waits on sometimes. He waits for us to come to him to say, okay, God, I did it my way. I did it my friend's way, my father's, my uncle's, but it's not working. So I need it to be your way. And don't ever be ashamed of that. Don't ever be ashamed of that. Be ashamed of it if you never turn to God. Because God's looking for us to come to him. We're his children. And remember, as children, obedient children, we have a heritage. We have promises. And the promises that are in the scripture are all yea and amen. These are promises that say, I guarantee you that I will give you what you need to overcome the enemy. And even though he was dealing this prophecy on Hezekiah, he told him, he says, listen, you're going to die. So you need to get your affairs in order. And what must have been going through his mind at the time? Because remember, the gospel message hadn't been preached. The Messiah hadn't even come yet. So what was their situation as far as knowing death? What was going through their mind? I think they had way more fear about death than we do. We have a Savior that conquered death. They didn't have that back then. They trusted God, yeah, but just like we trust God. But there was no Messiah that came that said, you know what, I've rose from the dead, so you're going to rise from the dead too in your glorified body. Didn't happen. Yet. But yet, there was still something that was going on that allowed Hezekiah to trust God, to know that God was faithful. Many of the Old Testament people trusted in God and believed in God, not receiving the promise as of yet. We've received the promise. How much more are we accountable? We have the answers. How much more? We keep knocking at the door, knocking at the door, knocking at the door. But yet we walk away sometimes. God's saying, come in. Come in. Taste and see, the psalmist said, that the Lord is good. Taste and see. Try God. Put your faith in God and see what happens. It's discouraging when we see people fail that know that they love God, but yet they're afraid. See, fear is the opposite of faith. Fear contains qualities that doubt, anxiety, depression. They're not seen in the kingdom of God, or they shouldn't be seen in the kingdom of God. But yet we read about it. We read about it all throughout the Old Testament. When the enemy was bigger than them, just like the Assyrian army, they were afraid. I would have been afraid too. You're outnumbered 50-1. But then you will realize that only a miracle from God is going to give us victory. That's the encouraging part. No matter what you're going through today, we can do all things through Christ. All things. That victory is within our reach. If we choose to follow the Lord and be consistent in the way that we do it. Let's read chapter 38 once again so that we can get Isaiah. Yes, I'm sorry. Isaiah, but we'll read from verse 9. It says, the writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and was recovered of his sickness. I said, in the cutting off of my days, I shall go to the gates of the grave. I am deprived of the residue of my years. I said, I shall not see the Lord, even the Lord in the land of the living. I shall behold man no more with the inhabitants of the world. And he was thinking about once he was dead, like what was going to happen. He was talking about not seeing God again. Well, that's not scriptural. Mine age is departed and is removed from me as a shepherd's tent. I have cut off like a weaver my life. He will cut me off with pining sickness. From day even to night will thou make an end of me. I reckon till morning that as a lion, so will he break all my bones. From day even to night will thou make an end of me. Like a crane or a swallow, so did I chatter. I did mourn as a dove. Mine eyes fail with looking upward. O Lord, I am oppressed. Undertake for me. Those were the animals that were in Palestine at the time, and they were, again, made all these kinds of noises, and he's just wondering what those noises were, and he feels like sometimes we're going to make noises, too, that we don't understand what we're doing. What shall I say? He had both spoken unto me, and himself had done it. I shall go softly all my years in the bitterness of my soul. O Lord, by these things men live, and in all these things is the life of my spirit. So wilt thou recover me, and make me to live. Behold, for peace I had great bitterness, but thou hast in love to my soul delivered it from the pit of corruption. For thou hast cast all my sins behind thy back. For the grave cannot praise thee. Death cannot celebrate thee. They that go down into the pit cannot hope for thy truth. The living, he shall praise thee as I do this day. The father to the children shall make known thy truth. The Lord was ready to save me. Therefore will we sing my songs to the string instruments all the days of our lives in the house of the Lord. For Isaiah had said, let them take a lump of figs and lay it for a plaster upon the boil, and he shall recover. Hezekiah also had said, what is the sign that I shall go up to the house of the Lord? And I'll explain that at the end. But even with this plaster of figs, I always feel like there's always a remedy. I don't care what sickness there is in the world, there's a godly remedy to it. And me, I love eating figs, but to put them on a boil, to put them on so there has to be some godly power in that. And I'm curious to see if the physicians of the world have ever looked into that, because I believe, because I've seen it mostly from the word that wherever there's a medicinal cure for something, God has an herbal or some other type of a cure for it, because God makes a way. If we can do all things, or if all things are possible with him, then anything is possible. I believe there's a cure for cancer. I believe there's a cure for all the illnesses that are in the world. But I also believe that there's a reason why they happen. And sometimes God leaves doors closed so that his will shall be done. and his will shall be done, as Deuteronomy 28 says, blessings of obedience, disobedience, curses of disobedience. And we look to that and we ask ourselves, am I on the right path? Because sometimes good things or bad things happen to good people, and it just happens that way. But remember, he was afraid of death here. He was unsure. But God heard his prayer. Does God hear your prayer? God says, I don't hear the prayer of a sinner. Not a sinner coming to God, but someone that's in God that continues to sin. See, we have to understand the scriptures. What does that mean? He says, sin separates us from God. If we come to God and we are born again and we continue to sin, God said, your sin, your prayers will go up only so high. They don't reach me. I'll cause something to separate us. I don't want to be separated from God. Imagine continuing in prayer night and day, but never being heard. I believe that happens many times. Many times to the... I'm talking about the people of God here now. People in the world, when they're crying out, God hears their prayer. See, God reacts a different way. You know, Pastor, Thursday night you were talking about how there has to be a love for the brethren. Remember what Christ said? Christ said, the first and great commandment is to love me with all I have. That's all I might. He says, you need to love others as you love yourself. But he says, the brethren, you love them as I love you. There's a special kind of love. So there's also a special kind of way that God treats his people. He says, listen, this is we talk about, God's a God of war. God's a God of jealousy. God has many titles in the Bible. But when he does things, he does it for the good of his people. I read an article this morning about one of the players from the Patriots leaving Amendola. And from the Patriots, he went to Miami because he got probably 4 times as much money. But they asked him to talk about the coach, Belichick. And he said, when I came here, I knew I was going to get less money. But the focus was on the team. I knew I had a better chance of winning a championship here than I did anywhere else because it wasn't on the individual, it was on the team. And he used some words that, I can't use today, but to describe him. But with respect. Because it's not about the individual. And that's why when we look at Hezekiah, was he worried about what was happening to him or what was happening to God's people? Are you worried about what's happening to you or what's happening to the body of Christ? There's a cause. It's the same thing in America. Freedom costs. But yet in today's society, the politically correct wants you to believe that this just happened. We live in a land of the free, the home of the brave, and it just happened. People died for this. A lot of people died for this. Same thing with the body of Christ. We have to die. No greater love hath any man that he laid down his life for his friends. Remember I told you in John 15, where Jesus says, when I reveal things to you because of your obedience, you become my friend. Because of your obedience, I'm able to tell you things. I'm able to share things with you. Just like the coach. He tell him, anytime you talk with someone outside of this group, just tell them how great the other team is, and you don't say anything derogatory. Don't give them any fuel for fire. See, there's something that goes along with winning. You have to be humble. You can't always say what's on your mind. There's a different way that we need to respond. It's the same thing with spiritual things. We can't just because something is right doesn't give us the authority to say it. If it's going to hurt the body, if it's going to stop the soul, a bruised reed he won't break, a burning flax he won't quench. What does that mean? That means if there's a little life in someone, you don't stamp them out. You use wisdom with the word. And I'm not saying you don't, I'm not saying that you water down the word. But you need to use wisdom. If you know someone has a little hope, a little hope. You encourage them. Those of them that are weak, those of you who are strong, strengthen them with the what? A spirit of meekness. Now, what do you think? Sometimes that's needed, but in the right situation. But how do we know if it's a right or wrong situation? Because we hear the voice of God. We know the voice of God. We understand. You know, I think it's Genesis 26. When God called Abraham, I know it's in here. Was it 26 and 5? Yes. It says, with 26 and 5, it says, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. That's what he said previous to that. He said, I'm going to bless his people and his land, and I will give all the countries the blessings that I've given my country. But even when God called out to Abraham, he says, here I am. He knew his voice. During the course of the day, God calls out to us. Do we hear his voice? The commander-in-chief is calling our name. But we are too busy to hear his voice, to do the things that we need to do. Because it's about me. It's about what I need today. What about God's plan? We've given up. We've chosen to be Christians. And again, I'm talking to the church. We've chosen to be Christians, to give up our lives for his. No greater love that you sacrifice your life for God's. No one held a gun to your head and said, listen, you have to do this. God says, listen, if you want to be my disciple, you need to give up your life. We tend to forget that, Pastor. We tend to think, well, we want to become Christians and live our lives so that we have good lives. Not according to the plan of God. And that's why we have so many different belief systems, especially in this country, about what Christianity really is. Christianity is following everything that God said, doing it his way. But we have a way that the justice system, that the of the people, by the people, for the people gets in the way, and it becomes a Christianity of the people. By the people, for the people. What kind of Christianity you want? Go into the yellow pages. You can find whatever it is you want. What kind of Christianity you want? You want to be able to commit a couple of sins? You can go to this church. You want to be able to commit all the sins? You can go to this church. This church is for whatever you want to believe. But then there's the Church of God, where God says, follow most of my rules. Doesn't say that in here. Follow all of my rules. Obey all my rules. But yet when we come up here and preach or teach this message, it's met with sadness sometimes. Why are you trying to push that on me? Don't shoot the messenger. Read the word for yourself. Find out what God says. And this is what we're dealing with today. The enemy is subtle. He knows what he's doing. My people are destroyed because of their lack of knowledge. Their knowledge and understanding what I want. This is what I want. The whole word. All obedience. But yet today it's every man did what was right in his own eyes. I was telling him Tuesday night, I was in Worcester waiting, Springfield, again, Worcester. Why does Worcester keep going this morning? Springfield, waiting on the highway, and I turned over, I seen Universal Church. All churches welcome here. You can worship here. Doesn't matter who your God is, we all worship God here. That's what we're dealing with today. No conflict. When you're doing what's right, there's going to be conflict. You think Jesus offended anybody with his message? I should say, you think he offended everybody with his message? I think so. Because he had a message that if you didn't get on board, you were offended. And even if you are on board, you got offended. Because he said, it's my way. You have to do it my way. It's a struggle. I'm not saying it's easy. One day we have everything under control. One day we're walking around and saying, I licked it. I did it. I'm in charge. Till our flesh pops up and we realize, wow, where did that come from? I haven't done that in 2 years. I'm still here. Oh. Crucify the flesh daily. Daily. We have to, it's a struggle. Look at verse 9. He said, in the prime of my life I shall go to the gates of Sheol. Sheol is the Hebrew word for the grave, or the place of the dead. And Hezekiah cries out because of realizing that God has told him that he was going to die. I shall not see Yah, the Lord in the land of the living. Hezekiah's pain kept increasing because he didn't realize what was going to happen after death. We know what's going to happen after death, because the Word tells us. Well, how could you say you really know? Because either this is real or it's not. I'm going with it's real. I'm going with every single word in this scripture, every single word in this book is real. So I'm basing every conclusion on what this word says. So I know it's real. Okay? Or else what am I doing here? Why am I standing here? Why am I teaching this? Do we really believe in what we say we believe in? Or when the pressure comes? Because the pressure is going to come. If you think you're in pressure now, you're not. I look at life, I look at the different histories that have gone through civilization, and the hurts and the pains that people continue to be in. We are so shielded by the pains and the hurts of life in society. And I'm not saying we don't have our own pain, but when I see what's going on, when I hear what's going on, when I hear what went on, the devastation, the disasters, I wonder to myself, what would I do? What would I do under such circumstances? You know, we respond quite differently when the fire is very hot. We automatically go into self mode. And I explained that last week and the week before with Peter. When the circumstance of emotion of love to Jesus was safe, he was like, I'll die for you. Whatever it takes, Lord. You know that I love you. But yet, when a little girl came up to him and said, you were with Jesus. No, I wasn't. That's someone that was dedicated to the Lord. That was one of his own apostles. And he denied him. And I'm saying that because I think we would have responded the same way because of the circumstance. But now, because the Spirit gives us the ability to live above reproach, we have the understanding that this life will pass on, and we will live forever with the Lord. So it's best that we do his bidding in everything that we do. And we stand for him in everything that we do. We're ambassadors in bonds, meaning that we're his representatives doing his will in bonds, doing his will, not our own will. And sometimes we find ourselves doing our own will. And that's what causes us to fall into those spiritual potholes where we not only just fall into it, but we get hurt. We sustain injury, and then it takes time to recoup. And by the time you recoup, you're behind the rest of the group, okay? And so now you have to play catch-up. And once you play catch-up, it's very rare that you win. God's trying to protect us. He's trying to keep us in a place where we'll be safe in the palm of his hand. No one can take us out of the palm of his hand. We choose to walk away. We choose to jump out. We choose to leave. Hezekiah his thinking was based on the understanding of the world before life and immortality were brought to life through the gospel of Jesus. 2 Timothy 1:10 says, but it is now made manifest by the appearing of our Savior Jesus Christ, who had abolished death and had brought life and immortality to light. How? Through the gospel. And for the most part, true. There's no clear understanding of the nature of life after death in the scriptures. You look at Psalm 6 and 5 in the Old Testament. It says, "For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave, who shall give thee thanks?" And this is exactly what Hezekiah was talking about in the scriptures at the end of this chapter. Even in Psalm 88, verses 3 through 5, he says, "For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draweth near unto the grave. I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that hath no strength, free among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, whom thou rememberest no more, and they are cut off from thy hand. Shall thy loving kindness be declared in the grave, or the faithfulness in destruction?" This is why Hezekiah doesn't welcome death as a certain roadway, I should say, to the presence of God. Because he's not sure. But I'm boasting this morning that we are sure. We have the way. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. It's through Christ that we enter into this place. Grave, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? Death gets swallowed up in victory because Christ rose from the dead. He conquered death. It's gone. It's gone. It's history. We will live forever. Forever. That should bring joy to us. But in our carnal minds, we say to ourselves, how is that going to affect me today? Will I still be able to play golf tomorrow? Will I still be able to buy my boat? Will I still be... We worry about things that are carnal. And I say we. All of us. It's just the way it is. That's why we have to be continually reminded. You know, Bob, I like what you said Tuesday night about Billy Graham when he first began preaching, and how he, all his messages, one of the messages he says, by the time you leave a service, you should feel convicted in your heart. If you leave a service feeling like you're okay the way you are, then and that life is just a bowl of cherries, then he didn't do his job. I want you to feel good through the Word of God. Not me letting you know you're okay the way you are. Because this message is for all of us. Every single one of us. And there has to be something during the course of the message that pricks each of our hearts in a different way. And that's why it's so crucial for us to pay attention. Because the minute that we look away, that's what we needed. The day that you're tired and you want to come to service, that's the service that was going to give you strength. That's just the way it works. God's ways are contrary to our ways. So how do you avoid that? You don't miss. How do you avoid leaving the house without your armor on? You pray every day. You don't forget. But I'll be late for work. You pray every day. But I'll be late for work. You pray every day. But my boss, you pray every day. But my boss, who's your boss? He makes a way. He wants to see what it is. You know what? They say everyone has a cost of what they're willing to sell their soul for. And I believe sometimes God tries us in that manner. I know you love me this much, but how about this much? How about this much? How about this much? God, you know I love you. I think that's why he said that to Peter 3 times. You love me? You love me, keep my commands. You love me, feed my sheep. You love me. Love me a little bit more. Show me. Stay with me. Hold me close to your heart. Read this word daily. Your flesh isn't going to want to read it. It gets tired. It gets tired. It gets weak. It gets weary. But that's why the Spirit, that's why we have to stir up the Spirit. Come on, sometimes when I come in and I say, let's give thanks to the Lord, and I start praising God at the beginning, sometimes I'm tired, just like you are. But we have to work through it. You have to get the cobwebs out. You have to do it. You have to work at it. To be an overcomer, where does it first have to begin? In your mind. I'm not getting beat. I'm not missing out on this. No. So I'll do whatever I have to do. Do whatever I have to do. My wife keeps telling me, I have a list, of all the things you have to do around the house. Then she said, I lost the list. I said, praise the Lord. But I think our second list is a little longer. But I thought I won. How'd that work out? So yesterday I began a job, and it was, again, strenuous because it takes, you can't stop. And I continued, and I was tired, and I said, no, I have to finish, But you know what? Working through it, by the end of the day, I finished what I planned to do. But it took effort. It took commitment. It took it took the ability to not look to my wife and say, did you finish? That's what the Lord's going to ask us. Did we finish? Did we do our job? Did you make it right? We're struggling. But that's okay. Because it's going to be okay. Soon, very soon, we're going to see the King. So when I get worn out or tired, I think on the consolations. I think on the prize. I think on spending, He's our exceeding great reward. To be in His presence, to be with Him, and to know that it's going to be okay. No more crying, no more tears, no more sorrow. I remember my mother used to say that. Better you cried than I cried. Why'd you hit me? No. Pay attention. Sometimes the Lord does the same thing. He gives us a spiritual slap. Wake up. Wake up. Do what I want you to do. So we see here that he's a little bit concerned with death, right? He says, Lord, I am oppressed. And so since he lived before Jesus' work was finished, he lived under that bondage of the fear of death. Hebrews 2, verses 14 and 15 say this. Say, for as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood,